So many games never make it to the publishing stage. A lot of the time, it's because they're just too big of projects. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 5 more ambitious games that never got released. Starting off at number 5, it's Chronicles of Elyria. So this is an MMORPG that launched on Kickstarter and raised a lot of money. It raised over $3 million in order to get made, and it raised it on the strength of a lot of interesting ideas. One I just want to put out there, I think is probably one of the more interesting ones, is this idea that there aren't NPCs to give out quests, but rather other players would do that. On top of that, other players can be party members, it can be business partners, etc., etc. And the whole thing was intended to be very detailed. Like, for instance, when you're offline, instead of your character just disappearing, an AI takes over. So it is kind of an NPC, but it's also your character with all of your stuff and doing things along those lines. On top of that, you could create your own dungeons. You could destroy anything in the world. There's no world map because everybody's constantly creating. Your character is extremely customizable and lives and dies, ages, etc. I mean, there's tons and tons of detail. And when you hear all this, the immediate reaction, at least for me, is this isn't going to get done. So, I mean, some not great stuff happened towards the end. Like, they created a sort of virtual land auction to buy land in the game and released a demo, which showed off some of the movement of the game. Like, there was a parkour demo, basically. And then 4 days later, they announced that the studio was closing, which sounds a lot like a kind of cash grab, maybe a scam a little bit. Long story short, the actual creator of the whole project clarified that his intent was not to just screw everything over and that a lot of people would be working on the game after the closure of the studio, however, not for any money, and that they would be looking for new sources of funding. But I mean, this was a while ago, back in March. And to be honest, like, it's probably partially attributable to what's been happening in the world as far as the virus and everything. But there's probably some mismanagement and maybe even some callous intent. I don't know. Still, it looked like an amazing game that really had lofty ideas that we'll probably never play. At number 4, it's Identity, a game that billed itself as a new breed of massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Now, it made some bold claims, primarily this one. Hundreds of players would interact in a world of absolute freedom. Now, absolute is a pretty harsh word. It means something specific in that there are no limits. And the game came out in early access, which, I mean, is a little bit further along than a lot of the games that fall into this category do. However, the developers just kind of gave up. This again was a Kickstarter project, and Kickstarter projects tend to be pretty ambitious, and that tends to be why people want to fund them. They think, wow, this is something that couldn't have been done inside the AAA system. I'll give it my money, that seems like a great idea. And then what they got in early access was an extremely buggy, extremely incomplete game where you could walk around. There are still miraculously some people that are positive about the game somehow. I find it very interesting actually to look through some of the positive reviews. I think they're actually a little more damning than the negative ones. Where the negative ones, like, you can see people complaining about bugs in a game and how incomplete a game is and how there's no content in a game on basically any game. Here's a positive review for this game. Attention devs, just a query. The gun range update hasn't been added yet for a couple of years. If you could give me a time frame for that release, that would be swell. Now, the game elements that have been released are a simple town square that you can walk around in. There's really nothing to do in it. That's why a lot of people call the game a scam. But this person thinks that it takes several years to make a gun range. No, it does not. You could probably do that in a week. And when you hear about a game like promising that you'll be able to do anything in it, you can live as a police officer, you can live as a thief, you can live as a doctor, you can blah, blah, blah. And like, it takes them years to add like one of the most basic gaming functions, the ability to shoot a weapon. No. At number 3 is Raw. Raw billed itself as a sandbox multiplayer role-playing game by a first-time dev, and, well, it's kind of what you should expect. MMORPGs are like one of the biggest undertakings a studio can take on, and if it's their first project, we're not really talking about something that seems likely. Now, obviously, a lot of people disagreed with that sentiment and donated $201,000 to the game. And, I get it. I understand why somebody would want to do that. This is a game that the developers, which by the way, there were only 2 developers on, and a lot of what you see doesn't look like something made by 2 developers, or at least something that is a functioning prototype made by 2 developers. Maybe visuals, I don't know. But these were people who said that they drew influence from Arma Life, Rust, and Grand Theft Auto, and you kind of think, okay, I understand how those things might come together. But here's the problem. That's kind of how they describe the game, is by saying, like, these things would come together. That's not really enough. A lot of the Kickstarter is more about, like, categories of places in the game, some things you can do, but it doesn't really describe, mechanically speaking, exactly what you're going to be doing in the game, other than a lot of things that kind of sound like, I saw this in another game, and it belongs here in my game. I like that. I don't know, most of it really sounds absurd. Like having 400 square kilometers be the open world, and when you see some of the scenes and how dense and specific it is, it's kind of like, well, you haven't made 400 kilometers. You spent a long time on this scene in particular, whether it be indoors, like in a store that's fully stocked, or outdoors in these beautiful nature scenes that are frankly very organic looking. And sure enough, like the funding got suspended for the game, meaning something was fishy by Kickstarter standards. And yeah. At number 2 is Star Wars 1313, which is, by the way, honestly probably a tie for number 1 in my opinion. Star Wars 1313 was kind of like Uncharted in Star Wars, on Coruscant, in the underbelly. And like, if I'm honest, that's probably one of the things I've wanted to see more than anything in the Star Wars series. I think that that's just a setting in of itself that is super interesting, because most of the time we're focusing on things with Jedi, we're focusing on various remote planets, we're focusing on galactic battles, etc., etc. And to have a game entirely set on one planet in the underbelly of the central planet, in my opinion, it had the potential to really tell a different story in the Star Wars universe. And, yeah, it would have been better than the story in Rise of Skywalker, I think, with certainty. And we eventually got kind of a hybrid Uncharted / Dark Souls-ish type experience with Jedi Fallen Order. It's obviously not nearly as hard as Dark Souls, and again, there's a lot different. But I lament 1313 quite a bit. I'd really like to have played it. Honestly, it just seems like one of those really big missed opportunities. What we saw of the game was pretty far along. It looked really good. And it would have been nice had they just finished it, However, the whole Disney deal happened and LucasArts became basically defunct as EA bought the license to be making all these Star Wars games. But this is one of those games that I just keep thinking about. I really wish that it was a project that would get resurrected and turned into something big and amazing and took the kinds of set pieces we saw in Uncharted and magnified them to galactic levels. I just feel like that could have been a really big, really cool thing, And also, I'm kind of a Star Wars nerd, so there's that. And finally, at number 1 is Metal Gear Rising, which was a game that Kojima Productions at Konami had originally conceived of and developed, prototyped, and gotten a far ways along when they realized it was not something they were capable of doing. They felt like the way they worked on stuff just didn't work for the idea. And also, the game, they couldn't get beyond 30 frames per second for whatever reason, although I doubt that that was the primary reason. Still, when Hideo Kojima said, "Hey, Hideki Kamiya and Platinum Games Associates, could you please make a game for us? We would like to work with you on it, but we think that you would probably be better at doing it than us." When they asked that question, they said, "Can you give me a smooth-moving, awesome Raiden running at 60 frames per second?" The Platinum Games guys know what they're doing too, frankly. And Metal Gear Solid Rising became Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, and also is not something that takes place in the official Metal Gear Solid timeline, despite kind of being in the official Metal Gear Solid timeline. It's weird. It is a fantastic game though, but I always wonder what it would have been like had they released the original version. A lot of the ideas probably would have been the same, but from the sounds of it, the execution would have been entirely different. This is one where I have to say I'm probably happy that the original version got canceled, if only to make room for a Platinum Games Metal Gear game. Love Platinum Games. They're so good. Anyways, that's all for today. Which of these games do you wish you could play the most? Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.